So, welcome to this live session. I'm going to talk about this question: how do I approach movement when my energy is limited? Is just get up and do it without the fear the answer? Clients tell me that they've tried that approach of just doing it without the fear and they deteriorated. So, what is the answer? I am going to explore that in this training. So, I'm going to share as much as I can. I will tell you at the end how you can access a PDF where I outline the key points that I'm going to make in this training. And if you're interested in getting more help, I'll tell you how to do that at the end as well. So everything I'm sharing with love. I recognise you are doing your best with the tools you've got. And what I notice of myself when I had ME/CFS and other people I work with is they don't always have the tools that they need. And sometimes they say things about how they're approaching things, and it helps me understand why they're kind of a bit stuck and what needs to happen in order for them to shift. I was working with someone this week and we got them unstuck. We got them to the point where they had a sense of clarity and that they ended the session smiling, feeling very clear about what they need to do and feeling empowered to do so. Someone asked this question in the group, how do I approach movement when my energy is limited? And this person said, the recovery stories I read and hear about are about reducing anxiety, mind over matter. Just do it. If that is the case, this person says, I would be well and living an active life again. I've never worried about what I'm able to do for the first 7 years, had a positive mindset, telling myself it would get better. It was just a matter of time. I've had the attitude, I did get up and be active and suffered from post-exertional malaise the same day, the next day or 2 days later. Absolutely flawed. This has caused me to deteriorate to now spending 90% of my day seated or lying down. Sorry to hear that. So last year I had to stop, retrain myself to now think I'm going to start very small and slowly and not overexert myself. And this person says, today I watched a video that said the complete opposite. Just get up and do it without fear. That's been my approach for 8 years and I have deteriorated rapidly. So there's a lot to unpick there. A few points. Number one, when this person says mind over matter, that to me implies positive thinking. And recovery definitely is not just about positive thinking. How we think can influence our experience, it can influence our physiology, but science shows us that when we're in a state of fight or flight and anxiety, that hinders recovery. When we are activating the parasympathetic rest and digest healing state, that supports recovery. Now, I know this person saying they weren't feeling anxious when they were doing activity, but that is an issue for some people, and therefore it's an important issue, and I will explore that. But when this person said, I suffered from post-exertional malaise after doing activity the same day, next day, or 2 days later, for me, that's a sign that they were doing more than their body could handle at that time. And therefore, a different approach, some fine-tuning is needed. So let's get into the meat of it. So why is this important to get our approach right when our energy is limited? Well, if we get it wrong, this is going to result, as this person is describing, as what I call an energy overdraft. You go in the red, okay? And it takes more resources to create a unit of energy when you're in the red than when you've still got some energy in the bank, okay? And that's going to result to frustration, pain, and it's going to hinder progress. As I say, it's very inefficient if we use up all our energy and we get overdrawn. It takes more energy to get back to, being in credit. Mistakes people make, and I see these in other people, and these applied to me when I had ME/CFS. So you have to decide whether they apply to you or not, okay? The first is that a person's mindset sometimes does not support their healing, okay? I'll talk a bit more about that, but in brief, people are often caught up in short-term thinking rather than playing the long game. So there's a kind of all or nothing mentality. Oh, I don't think I'm going to recover, so I might as well just go for it. And actually, they don't know that's true, that they're not going to recover. But continually going for it may be getting in the way. There are times when you might think, actually, you know what? I'm in a social situation, I'm having fun. I will overdo it, and that's okay. I'll just rest afterwards. That's fine if it's an occasional thing, but if it's a common occurrence, then that is going to cause trouble. I remember when I had Emmy, I had a friend who was always pushing herself, and she would experience, leaden limbs, as she called it. And I experienced that when I did really push myself occasionally, but I didn't do that all the time because I knew I needed to conserve my energy and play the long game. Okay? So that's the first mistake, having a mindset that is not supporting recovery. Second thing is not addressing the fear. So often people, without realizing it, their operating system is fear-based rather than trust-based. And it can become skewed, so they're more in fear than they are in trust. That was definitely me. That was definitely my experience. And it can get to the point where you're not really in touch with that part of you that has the capacity for wisdom and has the ability to be patient, pragmatic, accepting, compassionate, trusting, and the fear takes over. That was definitely my experience when I had ME CFS at one point. And what that can mean is that our emotions take over. We are in a state of fear, we're impatient, we're in resistance to what is happening, we're in frustration, we're self-critical, we're having a lack of trust. You may have heard me say this before, but Byron Katie says, when we resist what is, we lose, but only 100% of the time. Okay, so resistance is completely understandable, but it's not always helpful. And our behaviour can be driven by our emotions. Just the example I've just given, if I fear I don't get well, I might as well go for it. But that's not necessarily a helpful way of thinking or a helpful way of behaving. And the third mistake people make is doing too much too soon. Now, part of the healing process is learning to deal with the mistakes we make, because we're human, we're not robots. So learning to be relaxed even when we slip up, because it is difficult to gauge how much your body can do. And it is part of the learning process, learning what the body can manage at any one time. And, the body doesn't give us exact, clear information. Sometimes we are taken by surprise. I've been taken by surprise many times because I just didn't realise how depleted I was. Okay. Now, there are some opportunities here. If we get our approach right, we have a sense of being in charge. We can get a sense of hope, start to feel better, and that can give us hope, momentum, and a sense that we are moving forward, making progress. So what are the things that we need to understand? Maybe I'll go to my iPad. If you just joined, feel free to say hello, say where you are in the world. Thanks for joining me. So the first thing that I think is really important to understand is that when our nervous system is dysregulated, then that makes it really hard for the body to heal. Okay, the body doesn't produce and store energy, which means we use our energy up and we're not replacing it. Guess what? We're going to end up in a energy overdraft. Okay, it has other impacts. I talk more about this in a video I made called The 3 Things I Needed When I Had ME/CFS, and I talk about the 9 areas that I think are important to focus on. If you would like to watch that video, send me a message or comment below with the number 3, and I will send you the link to that video. So that's the first thing. We need to understand that if our nervous system is dysregulated, that's going to make healing difficult. Our body isn't producing, storing energy. We need to understand how to deal with grief. Because, if you have a health condition like ME/CFS, fibromyalgia, long COVID related conditions, then there is a loss. There's the loss of the life you had. Now, there might be some aspects of that life you had that you don't want to go back to. Certainly when I had ME/CFS, that was the case. I realised now, with the benefit of hindsight, that I was not living a healthy, sustainable lifestyle. And it's no surprise that I got ill. But I didn't see, I did not predict that I was going to be sick for 8 years and unable to work. So we need to know how to deal with the grief. We need to allow it. We need to get to the point of acceptance of where we are right now. And that doesn't mean accepting where we are right now as permanent. It's just saying, okay, for now, this is where I am, and I've got to think about how I move forward. So we need to think about what action we take, okay? So 3 elements there. Allow the grief, allow ourselves to experience that grief, but we don't want to stay stuck in the grief, okay? We need to accept at some point where we are, and then we need to think about what action we can take to move forward. So the next thing I think that's really important to understand is what I call the energy equation. Okay, I really should practice my writing with my magic pen. So we need to understand the energy equation. So let's talk about that. What we've got to understand is that we've got a certain amount of energy, and that's going to be different for different people. If we do some activity, then that may, let's try again. That may use up some of our energy. There are situations when the activity might actually enhance our energy and well-being. For instance, if we're doing something, having fun, that helps us feel good, helps us feel better. But there's 2 elements here. We're using energy up doing the activity. And for some people, not everybody, we're using up energy because of the anxiety that's associated to doing activity, okay? And that's going to be different for different people. And there are kind of 3 possible outcomes, okay, when we do that. We might kind of make sure that I'm trying to make this bigger, but it's not letting me do that. Let's try this way. We might match the energy and activity, and so we're kind of break even. That's scenario number 1, okay? We're not in an overdraft, but we haven't got any surplus left over. We might be in surplus if we do less activity and there's less anxiety using up the energy. Or the third, so that's scenario 2. Scenario number 3 is that we go into an energy overdraft, okay? So we need to understand that equation, okay? And for instance, if someone isn't generating anxiety, then that's not using up energy. That's great. But if they are, then that needs to be addressed. So the next thing I think we need to understand is where we are in the recovery process. So, for instance, if you're in the red, okay, then what I'd suggest is your battery is flat, okay? And when I first had ME/CFS, that was my experience. My battery was flat. I had no energy, okay? So when I hear kind of some approaches talk about, you just need to do something you love. I had no energy. So, if I'd done some stuff that I loved, playing the guitar, playing tennis or whatever it was, I would have just depleted my energy further. Okay? Let me just read out a comment. So Thea says, I'm predominantly bedbound, but I have a routine each day that is okay in my baseline, including washing and eating. I want to know how to increase my baseline safely, as I currently have very little time out of my bedroom and can never leave the house. I need to increase my stamina sitting and standing. Okay, so I will touch on that. I'll explore that, Thea. So thanks for making that comment. But I just want you to kind of get the difference between having a flat battery. Okay, this is the fourth point that I think is important to understand, is that distinction between having a flat battery and that may be the case when you're in the red, and having blocked energy. So what I mean by that is that there is energy in your system, but it's blocked. Okay, and from a Chinese medicine perspective, they understand that our energy gets blocked and that causes ill health. Now, when I went to see an osteopath, she was saying to me, and she was trained in, one osteopath was trained in cranial osteopathy, but another one I saw wasn't. But it was very interesting because they were both saying the same things. What they were saying is there's a certain point in my recovery, I'd got out of that completely flat battery stage, and I was more in the orange and sometimes dipping into the red. So I was fluctuating between the two. And they were saying there's energy in your system, but it's blocked. And they do this intervention, and the cranial osteopath, what they talk about is that they can, I can't remember how they describe it, but they know when your body's, the energy's flowing properly in your body. And the osteopath, who wasn't trained in cranial osteopathy, said, I don't really know how to explain it, but when I do some work on you, I can feel like your energy is moving in your body. So what they were doing is my energy was in the off switch. They switched it on, but somehow after the session, I managed to switch it off again. Okay? And that relates to the nervous system being in that dysregulated state. So it's almost like they were helping my body and my nervous system to be regulated, but then I'd go and switch it off again so it was dysregulated. All right? So when that was the case, when my energy was blocked, then the osteopath was releasing it. If I was able to stay in that regulated state, then it would be appropriate for me to do what I love, play tennis, play guitar, do more physical activity, go out on my bike, because I was activating the parasympathetic nervous system, okay? And that would have resulted in my body producing and storing energy. And for me, this explains why some people do make dramatic change. So I'll give you a couple of examples of that. And I know this is completely mind-blowing, but this is Siren. She literally came to the clinic in a wheelchair. From Norway. She was one of the people who lived in Bergen. Water got polluted in 2004, and many people developed post-viral fatigue, later given diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. And that's the diagnosis that doctors used rather than ME. But after the first day of the training, the second day she walked into the clinic and she never used her wheelchair again. This is a picture she sent me soon after the training. She'd climbed this little hill, and the following weekend after the training, she flew back to Norway and she went to her cabin in the mountains and skied for 15 minutes. Now that was, for her a massive breakthrough because she'd been using a wheelchair for a year. And she knew many people who'd got sick with ME, CFS, And she contacted me saying, look, there's all these people who want you to come to Norway. So I ended up, in the space of a year, travelling to Norway pretty much every month, training groups of 5 people. And, you know, I actually had doctors contact me because their patients had got well. And they said, look, I want to know what you're doing to them. All right. Including this very senior psychiatrist who's very interested in mind-body approaches. Okay. And this is a picture she sent me a couple of years ago of her skiing. All right. This is another client from Norway. Again, she came to London in a wheelchair. She came to do the training. On the 4th day, she flew back. So we spent 3 days together. On the 4th day, she flew back to Norway and climbed this mountain and sent me this photograph. Okay, so I'm just showing that to just give you that sense of what can happen when we do activate the parasympathetic response. Okay, so, and remember, you know, activating the parasympathetic response isn't just about dealing with the anxiety. For some people who are pushing themselves, maybe they're not experiencing anxiety, maybe they're experiencing overconfidence. But, you know, when we overdo it, that puts us back into the sympathetic nervous arousal. Okay? So next point is that we need to, if that's an issue, we need to install what I call the trust operating system. Okay, so if we go back to the slides, oh yeah, and this is another picture of Benta that she sent me later on, you know, just getting back to living the life that she loved. All right, so for some people, they are in a state of fear and that fear can take over. We need to start working and cultivating and accessing trust, patience, acceptance, compassion. More we do that, more we step out of the fear, it's possible that we can actually get to the point where we're able to take care of that part of us that operates from fear. So it's not like, okay, I don't ever experience fear, but the majority of the time when I have an unhelpful thought, I'm able to connect to that part of me that operates from trust and take care of that part that's operating from fear. It doesn't take over, whereas in the past I'd have an unhelpful thought and I'd be dwelling on it, thinking about it, and it would take over. All right. So we need to make some mindset shifts, okay, that support recovery. When we shift our mindset, so we can make that shift from impatience to patience. We can make the shift from resistance to acceptance. Self-criticism to self-compassion. And fear to trust. And you might notice that has the acronym of PACT. Okay? Just an easy way of remembering that. Okay? Part of those mindset shifts is changing the way we think about movement. Okay? So all movement. So Alan says, I've had a better week because of it. Okay, Alan says, I think I'm beginning to understand this week. More acceptance, trust, self-compassion. I've had a better week for it. That's fantastic. Okay, Thea says, I'm sceptical of anyone that claims to be better in a day. And I would have said exactly the same thing. All right. And that's fine if you're sceptical. I think there's nothing wrong with being a skeptic, you know, but there are people who have made that dramatic change. That wasn't my experience. It took me longer, but I have a friend who literally after one day said, you know, I'm well. And she still had to get fitter because her body was deconditioned. But she's someone I trust. I don't think she's telling porkies. But that's not everyone's experience. It wasn't my experience. I had to really work hard because, I was generating a lot of stress that was keeping my body in a dysregulated state. But as I say, it's completely fine for you to have that skepticism. I encourage people to be a healthy skeptic. That's someone who's open-minded, but they're saying, well, you need to convince me, rather than someone who's a cynic who, is not open to considering different perspectives. And we're all cynical at some time or other. Okay. So in terms of mindset shifts, we've got to start thinking about movement in a different way. And the way I encourage people to think about movement is all movement is movement. So let me explain what I mean by that. Okay. There was a study where there was a group of cleaners and they split them into two groups. One group, they told them that the physical activity that they were doing when they were cleaning was a good form of movement and sort of met the criteria for physical activity. And the other group, they didn't tell them anything about cleaning. Now, they monitored these people and they found that the group they'd told that the cleaning was a good form of activity, all their biomarkers improved. They lost weight, their blood pressure got lower, etc., etc. I've talked about this before, so I won't go into it too much. But they had significantly different health measures than the group who weren't told that. Okay, what does that tell you? What it tells me is our beliefs are important, okay? And so in terms of movement, I think it's really important to focus on what you can do, okay? This is a mindset shift. Rather than focusing on what you can't do, focusing on what you can do. I've worked with clients, and I remember one person, on the second day I trained them, I said, tell me about your positive changes. And they said, I haven't had any. And this person's partner said, that's not true. We went to a restaurant yesterday. You walked to the restaurant, you walked back. We actually walked up a little hill. And, he rattled off several significant changes, which were things that she hadn't done. Okay, I think she was a person who used a wheelchair to get from the car to the restaurant. And I said, how come, your partner's telling me about these positive changes rather than you? And she said, well, I used to run marathons. Okay, so she was making comparisons to how she used to be. Now, that's understandable, but it's not very useful to negate and diminish the positive changes because she hadn't done any of that stuff for a year or so. It's not useful to negate all of that. It's actually useful to say, wow, that is a change. So that was a mindset issue, all right? So we've got to focus on what we can do. We've got to take a long-term approach, okay? So if someone is focusing on, I want to do this, I don't want to be restricted, so I'm going to push myself, and that results in a dip or a crash, that's not very helpful. It's more helpful to think, well, actually my long-term goal is to improve my health, to get healthy so I can live the life I want. So I'm going to do activities with that goal in mind. Okay, so maybe, I would like to complete this task, whatever it is, tidying a room. But maybe I'll just do a bit right now, knowing it's okay to leave it to recharge and come back to that activity. Okay. So we also need to be really paying attention to our state. Okay. If we get our mindset right, then that can actually influence our state. Okay. We need to be able to access resourceful states. To be cultivating calm, trust, acceptance, patience. Okay, so this is not mind over matter. It's not about being positive. We're actually influencing our physiology. If I get into a deeply relaxed state, and this was something I had to do at one point when I had really bad flu. It was in 2009, the swine flu year, and I was in bed for a couple of weeks. And I was stressing. And I realised, actually I know a bit about, using my mind to influence my body. So I focused on just getting into a relaxed state for half an hour, twice a day. And in that time I was having a holiday from all the thoughts of I need to get better, I need to get back to work, etc. Okay, so I was actually supporting my body getting out of sympathetic nervous system or fight or flight and into the parasympathetic state, into the healing state. Okay, so we need tools and strategies to do that. We need strategies to actually activate our parasympathetic state, to regulate our nervous system. Okay, we need to, let me backtrack. If we recognize that we are in states of stress, then that is going to hinder your capacity to do more. Okay, so Thea, I'd ask you to think about that. Is that an issue? Is being in a state of stress something that you need to address? Because that is going to hinder your ability to progress. We need to learn to work with our sensations, to be able to experience physical sensations. Some people call them symptoms. I use the word sensations, it's less emotive. And to know how to navigate our emotions so that we're not driven by emotions. Okay? If I'm frustrated, maybe I'm going to push myself through gritted teeth, and that's going to result in a crash. If I learn to navigate that emotion, okay, I am feeling frustrated, maybe I'll just sit with that frustration, I'll breathe, I'll do meditation, maybe I'll do the flip the switch exercise that some of you have access to. If you'd like that exercise, put the word flip below and I will PM you the link. If you're watching on YouTube, comment below and I'll share the link. Okay, that's one way of helping to regulate our nervous system. Okay, we need to use visualization in useful ways. Many of us learned to use visualization, the power of our mind, in unhelpful ways. We picture, we create pictures of things going wrong. We're visualizing doing an activity or going out for a meal and feeling stressed and worrying that, it's going to, impact our energy. And that's putting us in that state of sympathetic nervous system arousal. Okay. There's research that shows that if you visualize moving your finger, then the muscles get stronger. Okay. That's amazing. Okay. And so we need to use the power of the mind to mentally rehearse in a useful way. I had a client who would get really stressed every time she had a shower because she was thinking, this is going to, deplete my energy. So we spent some time doing visualization, getting her to get into a nice, relaxed state, visualizing herself, doing the whole shower, walking to the bathroom, having a shower, drying herself off, coming back to her bedroom in a really relaxed way. And so she was able to shower in a relaxed way. But that also had knock-on effects. It meant she was, for the first time, able to leave the house and sit in the garden. Okay? So we need to use visualization. We need to start small. Okay? I talk about MSG. So M stands for micro movements. Rotating your wrist is a micro movement, but that's a physical activity. Just doing an arm curl is a form of activity. So if you, first step, do the visualization. Visualize yourself doing activity. Second, create for yourself a small program. Okay? Micro movements, slow movements, gentle movements. We don't have to push ourselves too hard. Okay? There are times when I was really depleted. I do Qigong for 1 minute. Okay, I've made a video walking you through my sequence, and I would literally do it for 1 minute, 3 times, 5 times a day. And just doing it for 1 minute, I felt that it was strengthening my system. Okay, so MSG, micro movement, slow, gentle. Okay, and as I say, if you'd like this gentle exercise routine, pop gentle in the chat. And I was looking at it. I created it about 5 years ago. I think I need to update it, but if you want, I will add it to the list of resources that you'll get with this video. All right, and if you want those resources, then comment in the chat resources, and I will send you all of these things. Okay, so Thea says, I don't think if it's much of an issue. Okay, that is the case for some people. Most people I chat to say, oh, I don't think stress and anxiety is a fear, but when I ask them some questions, they do start to recognise that there might be some issues for them. But for a small amount of people, that's not the case. And if that's your situation, then that's good. So Thea says, I've been ill for many years. I've been doing mindfulness for a few years now. All right, as I say, I'd be really happy to have a quick chat with you, or if you do that audit that I mentioned, again, if you want to access the audit where you can score some metrics, and it might give you some ideas of areas to focus on. I'm giving myself a lot of work here. Put audit in the comments, and you can access that exercise, which may give you some insights on areas to focus on. Okay. So Alan says, I was going to ask what's a good easy 1 minute exercise you can do. There you go. So check out that video where I talk about Qigong. Do a search on my Facebook page. It should come up. Let's go to the next point. I call it a 3-step system, but I kept adding letters to it today. So it's actually now, it is really a 3-step system, but I've added a few letters for convenience. All right. So it's called the easier system. So the the first E stands for establish. Okay. We need to establish our activity level. So that's having a baseline, working out what you can do without crashing. Now, some people say, if I did that, I wouldn't be doing anything. And what I say to that is that may be the case in the short term, but the goal is for it to be a short-term adjustment in order that you can make progress. If you keep pushing and crashing, it's very difficult to make progress. Okay, so you've got to think about this as a short-term measure. So this is why I'm talking about mindset. We've got to say, actually, this is not forever, but I'm just going to give myself the chance to actually recharge. And I might try this for a week. Okay, so we've got to acclimatise. We've got to find that sweet spot. I call it the kind of Goldilocks effect. What is the sweet spot in terms of activity where we're not doing too little? Because there are times when actually our body can cope with certain amount of activity, but maybe our fear is getting in the way. That was the case for me. I've worked with many clients who recognise that's an issue. We're not doing too much. Okay, so if that's like doing 10, this is doing 0 activity, 10 is going to the max, and there is this kind of sweet spot. It's going to be different for different people, where you're doing the amount of activity that is good for your body. We know that the body gets stronger when it's challenged a bit, and actually literally when we're walking, that's challenging the muscles, and obviously if you're walking further, you're challenging the muscles more. But we've got to find that spot that works for us. Okay, We're not doing too much so we overdo it and relapse. We're not doing too little that, we're not giving our body the physical movement it needs. Our body, thrives in normal circumstances with the right amount of physical activity. Okay, so that's the first step we need to establish, and I call it the Goldilocks effect because we're not doing too much, not too little. Okay, not too hot, not too cold. All right. So the A is that we've got to throw some acceptance into the mix. Okay, so in order to kind of establish, work with our baseline, we've got to just accept that this is a temporary thing. We've got to accept where we are right now. Many people are in resistance of that. Okay, so then we need to stabilize. So let's look at what that looks like in practice. If let's say someone can cope with 5 minutes of activity. The common mistake is they do that maybe for a couple of days, and then they do 15 minutes of activity. Okay, and then they crash. They're in the black, in the red, I mean. All right, so we need to skip that. We need to just maintain a certain level of activity, and it's going to be different for different people. I see people saying, oh, you should do it for a week or 10 days or a month or whatever. I don't know what's right for you. You might not know what's right for you. So there is some level of experimentation. For me, I might need to do that. There were times when I was in a bit of a dip. I needed to do 5 minutes for a couple of days. And then on day 3, I knew intuitively that I could actually do more. I could do 10 minutes, okay? And then I could go back to what I had been doing previously, which was about 15 minutes. And that would take about 4 days to get back to that point. All right? That's the next step. We need to stabilize. And only when we feel stable do we say, okay, when we feel it's appropriate, so we've established, then we stabilize, and then we extend. We might just do a bit more. Okay, let's say for 10 minutes. And again, it's going to be different for different people. You have to use your judgment. And the I is that we just integrate that level of activity. So, the body does just get used to doing that activity and thinking, yeah, I can do this. All right. And then we extend. And the other thing we do is to build in rest breaks. I've talked before about a lodger I had some years ago who was a fit, healthy person, went to the gym, had a busy, active social life, but every 4 or 5 weekends she'd have a weekend in bed. Okay? And that was her way of just building into the system this kind of rest period over the weekend. And she'd literally spend the whole day in bed. She'd get up for some food, go back to her bedroom, she'd chill out, she'd read, she'd snooze, and on the Sunday afternoon she'd go out for a walk. And she did that every 4 or 5 weekends. And I was really impressed because I thought, she is creating a mini holiday for herself. Okay? So if you ask what's integrate, the integrating is really that, by stabilizing, okay, our body just gets used to that level of activity. Okay? So, we're stabilizing, we're doing that certain amount of activity, and we're integrating it into our physiology. The body gets used to doing that activity and thinking, this is safe, I can do this. And then when we have that sense of that we've got that stability, we've integrated that level of activity, then we extend. Okay? So, final thing I want to talk about, okay, is this kind of 3-point checklist for considering our approach to movement. So on the vertical, we've got motivation. And on the horizontal, we've got ability. And we're also going to think about our confidence level. Okay? And what I want you to consider is sometimes people's motivation is high, and this is the people who are gritting their teeth and pushing through, but their ability is low. Okay? And if you're living like that, that's going to result in a crash. Okay? Sometimes people have got low motivation, and it might be that they're just not, it's not priority for them to do physical activity. I remember chatting to someone I knew from my ME group who was recovering, and she's saying, oh, I don't think physical activity is important. And I just thought, I didn't say anything, but I thought, that's a way of strengthening your body so that you are more resilient. So she just wasn't motivated to do physical activity. That was her choice. But some people have got the ability, but their motivation is to do activities low because there's some fear. So I worked with a client who wasn't leaving the house, and he did have the ability, but it was his fear that was getting in the way. So, I've talked about this quite recently, but I got him to just break it down into manageable chunks. Okay. So I said to him, how confident do you feel about just being able to open the front door, stepping onto the mat and coming back into your flat? He said, I'm 10 out of 10 confident doing that. Okay, so do that. When you feel ready, when you feel 8, 9, 10 confident to just walk to the first flight of stairs, do that. And he soon got to the point where he felt 8, 9, 10 confident being able to do that. And then he was able to feel confident about walking down the first flight of stairs, second flight of stairs. And then a couple of weeks later, his parents drove him to a cafe, and he said, I'll walk back. And it was about a 5-minute walk. And that was a breakthrough for him. He didn't experience any relapse, any dip. After a week, he was still feeling fine. After 2 weeks, he was still feeling fine. Okay. And that made him realize he did have the ability, and his motivation levels increased. Okay. So he felt more and more confident. Okay. So we want to make sure we're confident in what we're doing. If someone is doing something and if someone says, I'm 0 out of 10 confident about running a half marathon, it doesn't make sense to run half marathon. If you feel 8 out of 10 confidence that you can walk for 5 minutes, then walk for 5 minutes. Okay, so let me pause there. I've gone on for quite a long time. Any questions? So consider, what are your takeaways from what I've shared so far? So I've shared a lot, but there's, this is just a little snippet of kind of what I cover when I work with people. When I work with people, we are focusing on 9 areas. Okay, a lot of the stuff in the first 3 modules, getting clarity, breaking patterns, shifting your state, is about uninstalling the fear operating system, is about installing the trust operating system, is about working on mindset, working on emotions, regulating your nervous system, learning specific tools to help you spot when your sympathetic nervous system is aroused, and how to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you'd like to watch that video where I talk about those areas, just put the number 3 in the chat. I'll send you the link. I am going to be starting another group program mid-May. So if you're interested to know more about that, so we're going to work together for 12 weeks, then watch that video. And if you're interested, get in touch. Okay. So let's look at the comments. Colin says, always good to review these strategies. Thanks, Simon. You're welcome. Useful to think about. All makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I want to know, you don't have to tell me right now, you can tell me privately, but what action are you going to take, all right, from what I've shared today? If you've got any questions, feel free to send me an email or a PM comment if you're watching YouTube. Your question might help someone else, okay? So there's no such thing as a daft question. So if you've got any questions, do get in touch. But if you found this useful, do let me know. Share it with anyone who you think might find it useful. Let's pause. Maybe we'll just pause for one moment. I invite you to close your eyes only if it's safe to do so. And before we do a very brief relaxation, I'm going to read out Alan's comment, which I suspect is quite amusing. So, action plan: eat more Easter eggs. Alan cracked a very funny joke when I did a training before. I asked the question, what did Vikings do when they landed on foreign soil? And Alan said they started knitting groups, which made me laugh. So Colin says, I'm still working on getting into the parasympathetic state. Excellent. Keep at it. So I invite you to close your eyes as long as it feels safe to do so. And I invite you just to take a breath. Breathe in through your nose if that's comfortable to do so. Breathing into your belly and breathing out of your nose. And as you breathe in and out, just ensure that your out breath is a little bit longer than your in breath. And I'd like you to just tune in to your body from the perspective of the observer. As you tune into your body, just observe any sensations in a neutral way. If you notice a part of your body that just needs a bit of love, you can just imagine breathing into that part. Just acknowledging it. Just accepting that it is as it is at the moment. As you breathe in and out, just inviting that part of the body to soften and relax. You might focus on another part of the body that right now feels good. As you focus on that part of the body, consider that some of my clients, when I ask them where in your body feels good right now, some people have said, I can't find any part of my body that feels good. And so I say to them, well, how are your earlobes right now? You don't often hear people say, my earlobes are really tired. Or my nose is really tired. And then they go, okay. They find a part of the body that feels good. Imagine those good feelings in that part of the body as a colour. And as you visualise that colour, now just turn the brightness of that colour up. As you turn up the brightness of that colour, it starts to spread into the rest of your body, starts to swirl around your body. Enveloping you in those good feelings. How does that feel, just to do that really brief exercise that's taken us 2 or 3 minutes? consider that any time you need to just pause, you could just do that little exercise, which I call the body colour scan. So when you're ready, you can just bring yourself back. Just let me know in the chat how relaxed you feel now compared to before we did that exercise. Alan says, what was the first thing Vikings did? I can't remember. Yeah, it was definitely setting up knitting groups. So if, as I say, if you've got any questions, get in touch. Keep up the great work. Keep going. You've got this. Wishing you great health. Thanks for watching. Thanks for participating. Your comments make it more interesting for me. Wishing you great health. Bye for now.